All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Greater Egypt Long Range Transportation Plan Public Workshop. This is the first of two workshops we'll be having today. As you noticed on your screen, you can see there's a live poll. We ask that you participate in this live poll. It's also going to help you as we get later on into the presentation. You'll be able to ask and answer questions live and see the responses from your peers. So right now we're asking, what is one transportation improvement you'd like to see in your community? We've got a couple of responses already rotating on the screen. We see that there's definitely a desire for more bike walks and bike paths and sidewalks, some more multimodal options in your communities. So we're excited to see that here. We'll get kicked off in just a few minutes. We want to give people some time to log in and participate in this poll. So again, it is 12 o'clock. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. If you're interested in taking the poll, you can visit pollev.com/Greater Egypt, or you can text the word Greater Egypt to the number 22333. And once you've joined in, you can send your messages, your response via text message, and it will appear on the screen. So we hope that you'll take advantage of this opportunity. We are definitely going to be using this tool throughout our presentation, and it gives us a great chance to interact with you and gather ideas from the public. Seeing some other new responses coming in, more trees and landscaping. Definitely, we're looking at that quality of life issue as well as accessibility and connectivity. So all great things to see on this poll. We'll give it just a few more minutes to let folks trickle into the room. And then around 12:03, we're going to start with our presentation. Oh, I see a new one, more access to 5G. So many calls and GPS systems that drop. I was just in the Shawnee National Forest, and that was my favorite part about being there, is no one could give me a phone call. You guys are doing great. Thanks for joining in and using our Poll Everywhere service. So right before we get off, just a reminder, we love your feedback to what is one transportation improvement you'd like to see in your community. We'll be saving these responses and adding them to those that come in later today. Less potholes on rural roads. That's another great addition. Thank you all for participating. We'll go ahead and get started with today's presentation. All right. Thank you again. For those who have joined us, we are here for the Greater Egypt Long Range Transportation Plan. This is the first virtual public meeting of this project, September 15th, 2021. We are kicking this off at noon. It is about 12:03, so we are ready to get rolling. We are here today to go over a couple of different items. First, we want to welcome you and introduce you to the project team and what we'll be doing. We're going to review the scope of what a long-range transportation is, what it entails, so that you have a better idea of what we're working with today. We're going to go through some fast facts about the region and things we've learned so far in the planning process. And then we need your help to determine the vision and goals for this project moving forward. Once we've gone through those exercises, we're going to tell you a little bit more about how you can get involved. And then we're going to let you know about the next steps of where we go from here and what you can expect in the coming months. So with that, I want to turn it over to the team at Greater Egypt Regional Planning and Development Commission. So Joe Z is here from Greater Egypt. And Joe, I'd love to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so Joe Zdankovic with Greater Egypt and the Southern Illinois MPO. So I head up the transportation studies here at the Southern Illinois MPO, and I also do transportation planning and projects for Greater Egypt. I've been here since 2015, and prior to that, I was at IDOT District 9 for 30 years. And so just a little bit of background about what this plan is about and why it's important. And I know sometimes it's hard for folks to get excited about planning, but many of the grants that we apply for either require or give significant points for having some of those planning processes and studies completed. And all of those grants are competitive, and so we're competing against communities that typically are larger than us and have more resources. And so it's important in order to compete, for us to complete those planning studies as well. And with the creation of SIMPO in 2010, that of course gave us resources to do some of those planning studies. And we've really been able to leverage those into funding for construction and projects. And you can see here what that listed. Within SIMPO, we've been able to obtain $11 million in ITEP funding, $5.5 million in safety funding. And for the Greater Egypt region, that's now over $10 million in safety funding that we've been able to obtain through grant applications that started with planning studies that we were able to fund either in SIMPO or in Greater Egypt. And one other aspect of the MPO is that it's a forum for all of the local agencies and IDOT to get together and discuss transportation issues within the MPO. And that's been very beneficial for the MPO in helping us prioritize and also to work together to move projects forward. And we're hopeful that we can accomplish some of those same things with a rural transportation planning body that would be similar to the MPO. It's not required. The MPO is mandated by federal highways, so we have to do it. But with a rural transportation planning body, it would be voluntary, but we could potentially, and we would hope to accomplish many of the same things in the full Greater Egypt region that we've been able to accomplish in SIMPO.
Thank you for that introduction, Joe. Now we're going to move on to a couple introductions for our team. So we have a multidisciplinary team with us here, and just want to introduce a couple of the key figures who are going to be talking to you today. My name is Katie Shackelford. I'm the project manager for this project. This is probably my 6th long-range transportation plan. And an exciting time for Greater Egypt, and happy to be here to serve you. I have about 10 years of experience as an urban and transportation planner, and I also am a certified planner as well as a professional transportation planner. So that's what those letters after my name means. I started off my career in Central Illinois and spent 5 years working in the public sector. So now, as a consultant, my job is to make your lives easier and do my best to support these local communities and the regions of Illinois that we care so much about. So I want to pass it on now to my deputy project manager, Dustin Reichman.
Hey, good afternoon. Yeah, Dustin here from Lockmuller. As Katie said, assisting her with this project. I've done numerous projects for SIMPO and Greater Egypt, Illinois, Southern Illinois native myself. I've been in the practice, I guess you'd call it, for 20 years. My emphasis, definitely done a lot of planning projects like this, but my emphasis and my expertise really lies in traffic engineering. So bring a little different perspective than Katie, and really hope to complement her skill set and deliver a great plan for you all. So the other member of our team that'll be speaking today is Stephen.
Good afternoon, Stephen Ivandal. I'm the principal of the I5 group. We're a community planning firm. We're assisting on the transportation plan with community engagement. So you might see my name associated with some of the media releases and different things, marketing, the survey and the open houses. I'm also kind of a native of Southern Illinois. I grew up on a family farm in Washington County, just north of the Perry County border. So we're excited to be part of this planning effort.
And also want to give a shout out to our project partner, Clarita and Ziegler Engineering. They are helping us with the cost estimates and project development for this project, and we really appreciate their support. So with that, let's move into a little bit of our purpose for today's meeting. So this is the information that's most valuable to you who are watching and participating. Our big goals today, we want to discuss and get you guys up to speed on what is a long-range transportation plan and what's this process look like. We want to go over with you some community transportation assessments and find out what the needs are for your community. We want to review and rank those LRTP goals. So for those of you that already practiced using our Poll Everywhere, we're going to be tapping into that service again later this afternoon, and you'll get to rank our goals. And then we want to gather your ideas about the future of transportation in the region. So with that in mind, let's get started.
Yeah, so I'm going to take the first couple topics here. We're going to be asking for your feedback today and throughout this process. So just want to give you kind of a clarity and a vision on where we're going to use that feedback and how. So I'm just going to talk real quickly about the scope of the project overall. So Joe set a really good framework for SIMPO. And if you're not familiar with SIMPO, Southern Illinois MPO, it's the hatched out area you see on your screen, basically between Marion and Carbondale. So that is the urbanized area within the 5-county region. We are looking at everything except that, basically. So within Greater Egypt, we have the 5 counties: Jefferson, Perry, Franklin, Jackson, Williamson. So everything outside of that urbanized area is considered a rural area, and that's really the scope of our study. So it's a big project area that anyone listening probably lives, works, plays, or some of all of the above in one of those 5 counties. And we're looking at really all modes of transportation, not only vehicles and trucks, which we traditionally think about as our transportation needs, but transit, bikes, peds. We saw already on the Poll Anywhere a lot of desire for better multimodal use, especially bike and pedestrian facilities, but passenger rail, heavy rail, and air. And kind of where all this will culminate is in a prioritized list of projects within the 5 counties where money should be spent as it's gained through these grant applications and other sources to improve the quality of life. And so kind of the way that breaks down, our deliverable will be a document, but a very action-oriented and implementable document is our desire. And you can kind of tell with the existing conditions here, it really speaks to the fact that transportation affects all aspects of our lives. So we're not just looking at, what are the conditions of the roads and how can we make them safer? We're talking about things like demographics, what's employment like now? What will employment in the region be like in the future? What industries are emerging? Another comment that we've already seen is broadband access, and that's part of our assessment as well. Land use, environment, and of course, safety and transportation, the kind of traditional topics you would think about in a long range plan, but we really touch all aspects of our lives because transportation really affects all aspects of our quality of life and the future of our children and grandchildren in the 5-county region. And so again, we'll kind of tie a bow on this with a financial and implementation plan. So this isn't a broad-based, what could this look like in a fuzzy way? It starts that way, but as we refine it, we actually get into an implementation plan that says when we get these number of dollars, it should be spent on this project in a prioritized fashion. So it's a very implementable plan. And in the same way that Joe described how SIMPO works, that's how we expect this to work in the future, to where we have very targeted things that we're going out and trying to fund. And we have a very high level of leverage because we've done the work in advance to actually get those funds. So this is our overall schedule. We basically started at the beginning of this year. We will go effectively to the middle of 2022. We're kind of right in the middle of that process right now. If you look on the left side, you can see that for one, we do public engagement involvement throughout this process, and we've done numerous steps of that we'll talk about in a little while, and how we've already formulated some goals and some vision statements. We've kind of wrapping up right now the existing conditions, and we're going to talk about some kind of quick facts about what we found there. But we've got a very good idea of what's going on today. What we're moving into next and what we need your input on especially is the future and future condition analyses. So this can be pretty technical, but it's also qualitative because a lot of it has to do with what you want and what the desire of the communities actually is. And then the final step will be documenting it, again, making it into something that could be used and leveraged for future funding opportunities. So again, before we talk specifically about the 5 counties, we'll kind of step back here and just what is rural transportation? Why do we look at it? Why is planning important? So, I grew up and still live in what would be considered a rural area. It's pretty special. When you break down the facts and figures, it's pretty unique, and it's not what most Americans think about when they think about their transportation infrastructure. But the reality is that rural transportation networks are kind of the heartbeat, the source of a lot of our domestic production, of course, for agriculture, mining, and energy in our 5-county region. But it affects the quality of life of all Americans, how we treat the infrastructure in our rural areas. 2/3 of rail freight originates in rural areas. Nearly half of all the truck miles traversed in the United States occur on rural roads. And so, we're talking a lot about well, we're going to talk a lot about industry, things that require trucks and trains, and those things have a lot of wear and tear. And so they require a lot of infrastructure investment that can then be leveraged, of course, to grow the economy. And 90% of posted bridges are in rural areas. So if you're familiar, you drive out on a county road and you see a small bridge crossing any size stream or creek or river, they'll often have a posted weight limit sign. In your passenger car, that doesn't mean a lot because you can zoom right over it. But someone driving an 18-wheeler or a semi trying to get to market or trying to get to an industry, that can be a huge deterrent. A lot of times they can't cross those because the bridges aren't in a condition to support that weight. So they're posted with those limits, meaning basically they become a detour. And on average, that creates a 3x. The truck driver has to go 3 times out of their way because that infrastructure is not in place to be efficient to serve where they really want to go directly. And some interesting facts. So 19% of Americans live in what would be considered a rural area. Again, all 5 counties that we're talking about here are rural areas with the exception of Simcoe. So we take out the population, between Marion and Carbondale around or across Route 13. Everything else is considered rural. So in that context, it might make sense then that with only 19% of the population in the United States, that represents 68% of our roads, basically of our lane miles. So 19% of the population uses and supports financially 68% of the roads. That's a pretty big burden. 45% of our fatalities in the United States happen on rural roads, again, with only 19% of the population using them. So there's definitely a mismatch there. 34% of our highway railway crossings, so people getting hit in their cars by trains, that occurs on rural roads. And kind of where the bottom line of all this is that the fatality rate, the rate at which people die driving on our roads in rural areas is twice as high as it is in urban areas. So safety is always going to be our first and foremost calling when we're doing any kind of transportation planning. And this really speaks to why it's so important, specifically in rural areas. Kind of the last thing I'll talk about here is the difference between what we do in urban areas and what we do in rural areas. So as Joe alluded to, we have SIMPO. We have that MPO, we do have an urbanized area, so we've got that experience locally. And you can see a much better map here of Carbondale on the left, Marion on the right, kind of goes up into Heron and touches through Carterville. But that area is considered urban. It has been since 2010, when the census showed that these metropolitan areas had basically grown together and touched and became contiguous. They became over 50,000 in population, and that's the definition of an urbanized area. So the implication of that from as far as how we get federal funding to pay for stuff is now you're an MPO, you're a metropolitan planning organization. You have no choice, you are one, and you have to coordinate that way. And that's how money gets allocated and decisions get made and priorities get set in that MPO for that yellow area. Where we're at outside of that area, there is no federal requirement. So you may say, well, why bother? We don't have to do it. Well, as Joe alluded to, there's a huge benefit in doing it proactively because most other areas that are considered rural are not. So if you can put a plan in place, you can show this forethought and you have prioritized projects, it makes you way more competitive to go get those dollars that are available at the federal, state, and through other sources. So we are doing this long-range transportation plan, I guess you could say voluntarily, but really proactively, so that we can have an organization to administer dollars and be smart in how we leverage all the available funding and basically make the 5-county region thrive much more than it could if it just was left without a lot of organization, without a central document that kind of drives the decision making.
All right, thank you, Dustin, for going through all those important information. And if anybody has questions, please know you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to add your questions. We'll answer them as best we can. We'll definitely, if we can't answer them live, we will certainly add them to our project website. But now let's go through a couple of fast facts. So we're going to hit some things you probably already know about your region, some things you may not, but it gives us a good picture of what we're working with and how we can improve transportation for you. So if you can imagine, the 5-county area actually is a huge population. 223,000 people live in the 5-county area. That's a significant number of people. Of that population, we've got 12.8% who are non-white. We've got a certain 15% with a disability and 18% below the poverty level. Now, all these indicators are slightly or above the state of Illinois and the US average, but this is pretty consistent for a rural region. The other thing I want to point you to is on the right side of your screen, you can see the population pyramid for the Greater Egypt region. I've superimposed a little triangle on top of this population pyramid because by definition, a pyramid typically starts very narrow and expands, or starts very expansive and narrows to a point. In the case of the United States, we're kind of in a fat triangle situation because of the baby boomers. So all triangles look a little odd. In this case, though, what you're seeing is the Greater Egypt region has a significant population of people ages 25 to 60, and also a pretty large population of those 65 and older. However, there is a missing, there's kind of a missing link here of those 15 to 21. So those young professionals, those people just starting out, we see that there's kind of a missing gap there. And then we have an overabundance of people who are aging in the region. So we want to make sure, one, that we're attracting people of younger generations, and also that we're accommodating the needs of people as they age in place. One of the things we've found throughout our analysis is that Greater Egypt is a wonderful place to raise kids and attend school. And so how can we better support those needs and serve them through transportation improvements? Next slide. Some other things that we're going to talk about today, just land use and environment. So everything is connected in the transportation system. In fact, if you wake up in the morning and you never leave your bed, you're going to be the only person who's not engaged with the transportation system today. So consider that everything you do, everything you buy has to travel in some way. This is what we look at, and it affects all the other aspects of our lives, including the environment and the way that we build and develop. So we've done some analysis, and we've identified the top 3 uses of land in the Greater Egypt region. Over a third is for cultivated crops, so highly agricultural community. 26% are deciduous forests, and those include some really high quality nature preserves, and then 17.3% are hay and pasture land. So makes sense for a rural region that your highest land use, the largest amount of land, is being used for cultivation of crops, as well as just natural environment. And that's one of the reasons people love to be here. There's over 250 square miles in the Greater Egypt region of protected land. It's a really high amount, especially for the state of Illinois, and I think that's something to be celebrated. And it's one of the other things that we keep in mind is just making sure that stays protected as you grow and develop. And then finally, we just hit a little bit on water quality. One of the biggest concerns in a growing region is that access to high quality water is very important. According to our analysis, about 85% of all water bodies in the Greater Egypt region are impaired in some way. This doesn't mean that they're not swimmable, capacities, but it does mean that they are not as pure as they could be, and this could affect wildlife habitat, your ability to go swim and boat wherever you wish. So this is another thing we'll keep in mind as we plan for transportation improvements. As far as the region itself, there are 47 incorporated areas that make up the Greater Egypt region. So in order to best leverage these communities and the power that you guys have together, because if you imagine it's over 200,000 people, you have quite a bit of power. But we need to work together and speak with one voice. The top 5 largest communities in Greater Egypt that are not included in the urbanized area are Mount Vernon, West Frankfort, Benton, DuQuoin, and Pinckneyville. Now, there are many other communities, and we want to support them as well, but we keep in mind that those are the 5 largest that we'll be working with throughout this process. Education and employment. So these factors have a big influence on where and how you travel and what you're trying to do when you travel. So as far as the Greater Egypt region, nearly 50%, 55.6% of people participate in the labor force. Now, one of the things we keep in mind here, this looks about half of the population is taking part in the work in some way. But we also know that this region has a much older population than other areas. And as a result, if you look at those age 65 and older, and those people who are most likely to be retired or not participating, when you look at the prime age for people to participate in labor, 75.7% of the population is taking part. And that's pretty on par, just slightly below what Illinois' average is. Unemployment rate is 6.8%, slightly above Illinois. The income for the Greater Egypt region, average income is $45,000 nearly $46,000. And this is somewhat below state of Illinois and US average, but due to the cost of living, the reasonable cost of living, this actually ends up being a purchasing power of over $50,000. So you're getting a lot more than you pay for. Your dollar's going further than many other places. So that's one of the things that we can capitalize on through this process. Another thing to note is that the Greater Egypt region, as far as educational attainment, definitely competes well within the community, but we see that there is a high number of high school graduates and people without college degrees but did attend college, and fewer people with associate's, bachelor's, and postdoctorate degrees or postgraduate degrees. So finding solutions that work for people in different income and age brackets, as well as people with different education and employment needs, will be a part of this study. The industry mix, we just wanted to highlight a couple of things here. The biggest employer in the region is really the educational, healthcare, and social assistance services. And nearly 30% of people have jobs in this sector, well above the state's average. So in the light red, that's Greater Egypt. In the darker red, that is the state of Illinois. A couple other areas that you outperform the state of Illinois is in retail, as well as agriculture and public administration. So taking a look at these as the strengths of the region and places we see lots of opportunity, we'll keep that in mind. We looked also at how you travel around the region to get to and from work. One of the most interesting things we found is, despite the fact that there are so many people, most people obviously will commute by personal car, but the average commute time for this area, despite being so large, is 22.7 or 22.1 minutes. That is actually 7 minutes less than the state and the national average. So the average person living in Greater Egypt spends about 7 minutes fewer per day getting to and from their place of work. Only less than 1% commute by transit. However, there are 3.3, so nearly 3% of the population doesn't have access to a car. So those people without access to a car but are not commuting via transit need to find other ways to get to and from work. One of the most interesting things, we'll step back for just a second. As you look at the map, you'll see a lot of the main destinations for people who are going to work are in that SIMPO, that urbanized area. However, there are some strong indications that jobs are clustered in Mount Vernon, in DuQuoin, in Franklin County as well. So we know that the need is great throughout the county, and people are going to be traveling from across all 5 counties to get to these destinations. And some people will be leaving the county. So how can we support their transportation needs? As far as the transportation systems go, the Greater Egypt region has a wealth of resources. There are 2 interstates that pass through this 5-county area. Those are I-64 and I-57. There's a US route, US 51, and then there are 8 state routes that pass through this 5-county area. One of the things we want to keep in mind, though, is what Dustin mentioned about nearly 68% of all roads are rural. As you see here, there are over 9,000, nearly 9,400 total lane miles in the Greater Egypt region. Of those, 71% are local. That means they cannot be paid for through federal. They're typically not eligible for federal funding. So we have to find alternative solutions for those. That's a big burden for the population, particularly when you have fewer people living in a larger area needing to maintain more infrastructure. So 29%, that remaining 29%, those are considered collectors or above. Those are the larger road systems. Those are the ones that typically compete really effectively for state and federal funding. So looking at the gaps in the system, how can we best serve the needs of these local roads? And we know that walking and biking has become really important in the Greater Egypt region. As we saw recently, the Crab Orchard Trail was just funded. It's a great opportunity to increase activity, increase health and livability. And we know that we have opportunities to expand. So there's now over 22 miles of bike trails in the Greater Egypt region that have been identified, including Wren Lake, which includes 20 miles of that trail, Perkins Avenue bike lane in Mount Vernon, and another 34th Street bike lane in Mount Vernon. So hoping to expand on these numbers and grow the network throughout the 5-county region. Some other things to keep in mind, despite only 9%, 0.9% of people commuting via transit, your region is supporting a significant number of transit, and demand has been growing over the past 5 years. What's interesting to note is despite the fact that demand in other areas across the country has been on decline, the 5-county Greater Egypt region continues to grow and more ridership is using the transit. So we've got four major transit that we're talking about here. 3 of those are mobility, so bus services. That includes demand response. Those are the rides that you can call and pick you up. There's traditional bus, and then there's paratransit. So combined, you're looking at well over 1 million and 1.5 million trips using transit for the region. In addition, Amtrak travels through the region, and over 36,000 people boarded the Amtrak station in Carbondale just last year. So there's great opportunity to take advantage of the Amtrak and reduce dependence on a single occupancy vehicle. As far as freight goes, the region has an abundance of freight infrastructure, including 90 miles of the national freight network. There are 4 of the 7 Class 1 railroads. That's nearly 600 rail miles of Class 1 railroads throughout the 5 counties. And then there are 40 miles of short line railroads that include the Evansville Western Railway. So an abundance of rail resources, or excuse me, resources for mobility throughout the region. And here, what you see on the screen, we also analyzed a little bit of transportation safety. So what you're looking at are some high frequency crash locations. These are places that compared to the state of Illinois' average, residents are crashing at a higher rate of frequency. So what that means is more crashes than would be anticipated based on how many people are using it and how many people are driving on the road. So these are clustered around Mount Vernon, West Benton, and areas throughout the region. You can see a lot of those are clustered in the urbanized area. Obviously, higher population increases the chances and likelihood that you're going to get into a crash. But we want to make sure that we're taking care of all of our residents and addressing their safety concerns throughout this project. So we'll be looking at these crash clusters as we continue the analysis. We also just, we did a deep dive into locations where crashes were taking place at intersections. We do have high severity crash clusters throughout the 5-county area. In Jefferson County, the location of East South Street and North Main Streets. In Perry County, it's US 51 and Hickory Street and North Hickory Street, and State Road 154 and County Line Road. And then in Franklin County, it's 1800 East, 1550 North Ewing Road, and finally in Jackson County, US 51 and Old US 50 at Maconda Road. So those are our those top 5 crash locations. We call those hot spots. What you might notice are also some blue spots. We call those cold spots. So cold spots are places where crashes are taking place at a very high rate. However, they're not very severe. So those might be near misses, some minor fender benders, but people aren't getting hurt. So we do want to take a look at what's going on in those locations where you see blue dots on your screen. We'll be diving into that a little more deeply and maybe analyzing if there's some improvements that need to be made to address those concerns. So now I'm going to take over the screen from our good friend Peter, who's been driving the bus. And we have another question for you, the audience. So give me just a moment. So once again, using your phone, your cell phone to text or using your screen, you can text the message Greater Egypt to the number 22333. But we would like your take now on what is the biggest transportation issue in your community. And while you're answering those questions, we do want to open it up for conversation. We have a question in the Q&A box. There's a great question here. It says, this might be featured later, but how do you see Castle Ridge increasing infrastructure and innovation in our communities, especially once we get back to normal? Would any of our team members like to take that question? Joe, are you familiar with Castle Ridge?
No, I am not. So not knowing what Castle Ridge is, I can't do much with the answer. Maybe they can help us out with that.
All right, well, Christian, if we don't get an answer to you today, we'll look into that more deeply, but thank you for bringing it to our attention. I see we've got some answers coming in. I'm going to take this opportunity just to turn the questions around to our team. So Josie, representing Greater Egypt, can you give us a little bit of an idea of how planning has helped the SIMPO and Greater Egypt region in the past few years? What are the things that you've been working on? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but just as an example, we just completed in June a safety study of the Greater Egypt region, not including the MPO. And that was conducted by Crawford, Murphy, and Tilley. And so they identified high crash locations, segments, and intersections, and worked with the county engineers primarily to put together some applications for safety funding. So as a result of that study and those applications, we received $600,000, over $600,000 for North Marion Street in Jackson County for shoulders and other safety work, paved shoulders. Over 1.6 million for Dix Irvington Road in Jefferson County, 2.3 million for improvements to Pyatt Cutler Road in Perry County. Almost 600,000 for improvements to Airport Road in Jackson County, $1.5 million for Richview Road in Jefferson County, 1.1 million for intersection improvements and other improvements to Greens Market Road and Wells Street in Perry County. And in addition to the roadway improvements, we received over $2 million for safety improvements to railroad crossings, highway rail crossings, rural crossings in Perry, Jackson, Jefferson, and Franklin counties. So that's an example of one of the studies that we've been able to use to leverage funding for improvements. And you can, as you can tell by the list, I mean, it's a very significant amount of funding that we've been able to leverage.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And I'm really proud. Every time we revisit this list, you've won a new project. So kudos to SIMPO and the Greater Egypt region for being so successful at these pursuits. We've got a lot of great feedback coming in on the poll. Obviously, we have some concerns about surface issues and potholes, but also some great things brought in here. Water drainage and narrow roadways issues throughout the region, needing access to more truck parking. We do appreciate that you added that Castle Ridge link there below. Narrow roads and road conditions. So there is some concern about that. And we've heard a little bit about flooding. So we now have a second question for you. So thank you all for participating in that poll. We're going to move on to the second question of this poll, which is, what is your biggest safety concern when you're traveling in your community? Your biggest safety concern. Again, you can text your answer. If you have not responded yet, you can text Greater Egypt to 22333. If you've already texted your response before, you just need to text your answer. So you only need to log into that system once. Attention of other drivers, that is definitely, particularly on long, narrow roads, it's easy to zone out a little bit. So while we're getting these responses, wanted to pass it off to Dustin maybe. Dustin, can you share a little bit of what you've learned about Greater Egypt in your time working in the 5-county region?
Sure, Katie. I mean, I think a lot of my experience goes back and kind of help with the formation of SIMPO. And so that was an interesting time. This is going back 2012 to 2015 as that organization was getting going and doing some of the very initial studies and kind of foundational work. And I think at that time, what was interesting to me about the region, not surprising at all, there was this fear almost about like, well, we've all been doing things the way we've been doing it as far as how we get our funding and be able to prioritize what we want in our own communities. So naturally people kind of work in silos. And I think what's really emerged over the past 10 years, really, which is crazy to say, but at least, last 8 to 10 years, is a lot more collaboration. And I think the fruit of that is in, kind of the project list that Joe mentioned. And I know that Joe has mentioned in the past, the Crab Orchard Trail, and that was inconceivable, honestly, just thinking like 2010 to do a project that had participation from the city of, Marion, Carbondale, the state agencies that control the lands, the IDOT, and I think it's Carterville. There's numerous communities and organizations and funding sources that all participated to get a project that really connects and serves the whole region through that corridor. So I think that's really the vision here too for what we're doing in Greater Egypt. So it's just this sense that the collaboration is not only possible, because I think some people are like, I just want to do what I do in my town. I'm the mayor of my little town, and that's where my focus is. That there's been this recognition, and we've really seen the fruits of it again in money and in other ways, that collaboration is really possible, and we're seeing it on a bigger scale now. So I mean, just personally in the meetings we've been in, we're going to talk a little bit about the visioning, but being in steering committee meetings, meeting with a lot of the different leaders, county engineers, mayors, public officials, people at the transit agencies, et cetera, there is a real enthusiasm. Like people are taking their own time to come and collaborate and talk about issues for transportation, not because they have to, but because they really see the greater good and the fact that this is generational and that this collaboration is really going to make this 5-county region win in a difficult state. We hear about the constraints of being in Illinois. And again, I'm an Illinois native, and you can go with cynicism and say like, there's nothing we can do. We've got this monkey on our back. Or you can say, look, that we are where we are in the state that we're in, but we could be the best region in the state and we can make our own future bright. So that's what comes to mind for me. Maybe that sounds more like a rah-rah speech, but I've been very, very enthusiastic in how engaged people are and how they really see a brighter future. And they're very proud of where they are now, and they see things getting better, not worse. And that can't be said for all parts of the country and even within our state.
All right. Well, thank you, Dustin. Appreciate that kind of look back and how progress has come through the region. We want to take a moment. Thank you all for your participation. Peter, if you want to get ready to take over the screen, we saw some great indications of safety concerns. A couple that definitely resonate, especially in rural areas, include narrow roadways as well as animal impacts. Also, the idea of concerns about turnings and stopping and construction. So all of those things we're going to take into consideration. If you happen to be watching this as a recording in the future, please feel free to email our team. If you have specific locations that concern you, we'd also love to hear that. Our analysis is going to tell us certain things, but one thing it's not going to tell us are near misses. There's a lot of places that we've identified in the past that are, locations that are strenuous or stressful for drivers. However, crashes don't take place there. They just almost take place there. And we'd love to hear about those so that we can make sure that we address any concerns that you may have while traveling throughout the region. So with that, we'll move on to our goals and vision. This is really the last element. We have some feedback requested from you, but let's go through our vision and goals. So early on in this process, we've started with a robust engagement strategy. And to do that during COVID is pretty challenging. But what we've decided, we've tackled this with 2 regional leaders roundtables. So what we did was started in July, pulling together mayors and regional leaders to have a discussion about this process and what we hope to achieve. And using their feedback, we went through an exercise called a SWOT analysis. That's a strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We looked at things that were internal and external, those that were both helping us and hurting us. And we used those to guide the process of developing some goals and a vision. We then took that goal and vision draft and we took it to the steering committee. So the steering committee is made up of more technical experts, those people that are very involved in either certain aspects of the transportation or economic system, or those people with certain technical expertise that can help answer tough questions as we go through this process. Those technical experts then reviewed the vision and those goals, and they have provided their feedback. And now it's our turn to invite you to provide your feedback and your prioritization of these goals. So we've also, just to add, Staffing county engineers, we've kept them involved throughout this process, so we make sure we're aligning all 5 counties to speak with one voice. And that's one of the things that we are really hoping to achieve, is that Greater Egypt comes out of this process able to speak with one voice, using all 200,000 of your residents to push your initiatives forward. So we just want to go through quickly your vision as defined by the regional leaders as well as our stakeholders, is that the Greater Egypt region will be known as a land of opportunity, a strong region with a vibrant economy, pristine natural environment that make it a choice destination to live, grow, and prosper. Now, if you have any thoughts about how you would modify or change this, please feel free to add your comments in the Q&A. But we'd also like to take this time to just take a moment. What a vision is your look at the future. It may not be where you are today, but it is where you hope to be in the future. This plan does have a 20-year planning horizon. So this is what we hope to achieve in the next 20 years. How do we do that? Well, let's get to our goals. We have these draft goals we're sharing with you today. We're going to take a moment to review them, and then we're going to turn it over to you and ask you to rank them of level of importance. So these goals, listed in no particular order, are based on what we heard from the leaders and the stakeholders. The first is to increase transportation safety, increasing access to opportunities. So that means our ability to get to and do things, increasing quality of life, increasing financial sustainability. So that is internal financial sustainability for our local governments, county governments, local agencies. And that way we're not, we're living in a conservative way, one that does not spend money we don't have. When we talk about support for active and healthy living, that's not only our ability to go out and enjoy nature and hike and climb and bike and swim, but also just active transportation, how we move and get about our communities. Can we bike there? Can we move there on our own 2 feet? Are we required to use an automobile? Preservation of the natural resources. Overwhelmingly, this is one of the highest things that was brought up by our steering committee and leaders roundtable, was the value and quality of the natural environment in the 5-county region is just above and beyond many other places available in the country. And so how do we preserve and protect that for future generations? And then finally, increasing economic resilience. So when we talk about economic resilience, that is our ability to earn and make more money as individuals and residents and businesses that are located within the region. So with that, I'm going to hop in once more. To our presentation. And using your cell phone or your computer, we're asking that you rank these goals in level of importance. So 1 being the most important and 7 being the least important. The reason we ask you to rank these goals is because not all of these are created equal. Not all of these things are the most important thing for your community. Some may be carrying more weight than others. And when it comes time to prioritize these projects, if safety is the highest priority, those that are addressing safety concerns will rise to the top and get funded first. Those that may be addressing other issues would naturally end up in a different ranking. So what we ask you to do now is rank these goals in level of importance using your cell phone or your computer. As answers come in, the screen should change slightly. As you can see now, as each of your votes come in, these things are going to massage and change order. We will leave this up live for the remainder of our discussion. So even though you may not see it on your screen, we still are accepting responses throughout the remainder of this meeting. So while you guys continue voting, we'll revisit this at our closing, but I want to hand it back to Peter so that we can go through the remainder of our presentation before we wrap up today.
Thank Thanks, Katie. It's very important to get involved, throughout this process. Community engagement is very important, but it's also a challenge sometimes at a regional level, especially 5 counties. A lot of times, folks don't think about issues at a 5-county area. And also, when we say long-range transportation plan, whenever we say long-range planning, again, sometimes it's a challenge to get people excited about being involved in that. Sometimes it's hard to wrap your arms around about the importance of some of these long-range topics. But engagement, it does matter, and you see on your screen now in terms of some of the reasons why. I mean, the most important one of these is number 2 there, creating more effective solutions. Katie mentioned some of the engagement that's gone on already in terms of a leadership roundtable that we had, initial meeting back in July. We also have a great steering committee that has representatives of all the 5 counties, also the different modes of transportation. We've talked a lot today about vehicular transportation, but members of the steering committee also represent transit in the 5-county area. There's several airports. So the steering committee, we have great representation from the different modes of transportation. So we're getting a lot of great input from the leadership roundtable and the steering committee. And also the planning team, we're pulling together a lot of great information. We've shown some of the existing conditions in this presentation. But we know we will miss things. We really want resident feedback, and there's some different ways in terms of a text-based survey and a map survey in terms of what are your transportation priorities, what are your priority projects, and it really helps us fill in that missing information. The hub of communication is our plan website, the Greater Egypt Transportation Plan.org. There you'll find background information, updates on the schedule in terms of what's happened in the past, upcoming schedule. Right now we have 2 survey tools. There's a text-based survey. And we also have a interactive web map tool that we'll go over in a little bit more detail. And we also want to be very transparent in this process, so that if folks come into this process a little bit later, they can easily catch up. So we'll have the recordings of today's noon webinar. We're also having a webinar tonight at 7 o'clock. So recordings of both of those webinars will be on the website. So again, if folks miss these live meetings, they can go back and watch the recordings. We also just kicked off a community survey. There's a link to it on the website. Covers some of the questions that we've asked during the webinar today in terms of what are your top transportation issues, what are your biggest priorities for the region. It's a 10-minute survey. So again, if you're a member organization, if you're on the call today, please share with your members. If you're a city, please share with your council members or committees. If you're a chamber, share with your members. The best way to get folks to take the survey is to hear it from other local contacts. So please share it with your Facebook, email, etc. Really share the survey. We just kicked off. I think we're around in the 30s right now in terms of responses. We want to get to 100 by the end of this month. Our initial deadline is September 30th, but we'll be extending that into October also. Also on the website is a mapping tool. So if you go to the website, you'll see a box for a mapping tool. It's an interactive mapping tool, and Peter's going to share his screen and walk you through how to use this map tool. It's a really great tool to kind of supplement the text-based survey, where you can go in and actually make map-specific comments to a map of the 5-county area. So if you have suggestions for safety improvements, etc., you can make that on the actual location on the map. So again, Peter will walk you through how to use this map tool.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So once you make your way to the website, like Stephen said, you can find the mapping tool by clicking here on this little button. And then this pulls up the tool here. We put a splash screen up here with instructions in case you forget what I'm saying here, but I'm just gonna click OK. Looks like we already have some, which is great. So once you get to the map, you can, it kind of works like Google Maps or Google Earth. You can kind of pan around by left clicking and dragging the mouse. You can zoom in and out to a location using the scroll wheel on your mouse. There's also a search bar up here that you can click in and type an address if you want to go to your home address or your work address. And the whole point of the map here is to give us your ideas on particular projects or particular areas of concern. So we have a couple preset categories here, such as flooding concerns, potential development sites, areas where there are safety concerns. And then we have a couple catch-alls. So we have some other idea categories for points and for routes, in case one of these categories doesn't quite fit your idea. And so once you find a particular location, let's say you find this intersection here particularly dangerous because of speeding or it's hard to see. So like I said, you can zoom in here using the scroll wheel. Over here on the categories, we'll click on safety concerns, just like that. And then go to the intersection and left click again on the map, and it drops the point down. You can put your name in here if you'd like. This helps us to identify you if you'd like to be identified. It can be completely anonymous. We don't share it with anybody, but it also helps. It also allows other people to come into the map and see who put that point there. And then you can type your description in here in terms of what you're experiencing here, so that way we can have an idea of the challenges at this particular intersection. So once you filled out this box, you can hit close, and then that information is saved in here. Like I said, other users who go to the map can then see that information, and then that information is also relayed to the project team, and we can use it as we're developing our list of projects.
And as Peter kind of gets back to the presentation, again, just want to emphasize, please take the survey yourself. Also, again, encourage others to take the survey, whether it's friends, families, colleagues, et cetera. It'll make the plan stronger in terms of the more folks that can take the survey and share their thoughts. It really makes the plan that much stronger. So again, please share the word about the survey, to take the survey here this month.
Great. Thank you all for joining us and participating today. We are open for questions if you want to add your questions to the Q&A box. While we're waiting for any questions to come through, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our next steps. So after we leave these meetings, we have these 2 public meetings. We're going to be gathering that information from the web map and the survey. So in the coming months, we want your feedback on what are your biggest concerns and the areas you want to see improvement. That'll be guiding our process as we keep moving forward. After this stage of gathering information, what we're going to be doing is taking your information and turning it into solutions. We are developing a call for projects, so we're going to be working with your local government agencies and your leaders to identify projects that they may see as important issues. And then we're going to be performing some financial analysis. So after this is all done, we'll be wrapping it together and visiting you again in the spring so that you can help us prioritize these projects and add any projects that may be missing, but also analyzing to make sure that we are aligned with the goals and objectives that we've identified here and the prioritization that you've shared with us. So again, your feedback with the interactive map and the survey is very vital to making sure that this project not only is successful, but reflects your needs and concerns. So the more people that you encourage to participate, the more likely that this plan is going to reflect your concerns and your needs for your community. So with that, we are at 12:59. I'll keep an eye out on the Q&A box, but we want to thank you all for joining us for this last hour. We hope you've learned something. We hope that you feel empowered to make a difference. You are definitely part of this process, and we are excited to have you here. Please share the word and encourage your friends and family to participate. And we hope to see you again here in the spring with new updates and a vision for the future that you can see come to fruition. With that, it is 1 o'clock. I do not see any questions in the Q&A box. We'll just hand it over to the last slide. For those who may have other thoughts, please know that you can always email us. Dustin and I have added our email contacts to the screen there. You can also use greateregypttransportationplan.com or .org. Just so you know, we have both of those email accounts. You can contact us via those websites and send us your messages. Our lines are always open, and we are always encouraging you to share your thoughts and opinions. They are what make these planning projects so important and so successful. So with that, I want to thank you all again for your time. I hope to hear from you soon, and have a great rest of your day.